All right.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Summer of Protocols Guest Talk series. This series is part of an 18-week program where a cohort of 34 researchers are exploring the various aspects of protocols. You can find out more at summerofprotocols.com. Today, we're talking with Bryan Johnson about the Blueprint protocol. Our next session will be next Wednesday with Kaz Varnelis. The pre-meeting reading material will be linked in the program calendar at summerofprotocols.com. So with that, I will pass it off to Venkat to introduce our guest speaker today.
All right. Should be a fun one. All right. So we're going to do it in a little bit of a different format this time, since Bryan suggested an interview format. So I'm going to try and do my best James Lipton inside the actor studio type interview thing. But yeah, Bryan, I've known for almost a decade now. I think we first met in 2015 when he reached out and I started doing consulting work with him, sold his first startup, Braintree, to PayPal, and he had a lot of money and wanted to do ambitious things with it. And over the next couple of years, we worked together, and he identified brain technology as kind of the most powerfully interesting, high impact thing he could possibly do. And so that's how his second startup, Kernel, was born. And along the way, by the way, he was also running an investment firm called OS Fund. But Kernel produces brain-machine interface devices using magnetic and optical flow technologies. It's amazing stuff. So check out kernel.co, and you'll see all the like really fascinating things they can do. They can basically do MRI scale brain imaging at much lower cost. So it's like really disruptive technology. So that's an exciting thing, and we could do a whole session about that. But today we will actually talk about his other project, which he started several years ago, which is this Blueprint protocol project. And this is Bryan's kind of effort to turn himself into, I guess, a reverse aging superhuman, and go down like a path that's some people find super inspiring, other people find super disturbing. So it's like amazing to watch his journey, because I've kind of like had a front row seat over several years, and I personally got a bunch of like interesting ideas on my own very limited attempts to do what he does. More than the money, it's really the dedication and effort it takes. So like I wear this Whoop watch, which I think I first saw Bryan wearing, and I think a couple of supplements I take now, I first heard of from Bryan. So that's kind of the backdrop here. But first, yeah, welcome, Bryan, and thanks for agreeing to do this interview here.
Yeah, first, Venkat, I'll give you a shout out. I read one of Venkat's articles about a decade ago, and his mind was so beautiful. I called him on the phone and started talking to him just about all these ideas. And he's like, wait, hold on. What's even happening here? Who are you? What's going on? But I was just so enthralled with the way he thinks. And then over the years, I've learned that anyone who Venkat associates with also has similar characteristics. So I'm excited to talk to you all. And in anything we talk about, my assumption is you're going to have more interesting things to say than I will. Certainly if you're hanging out with Venkat and you think the way he does.
All right. Thanks, Bryan. That was a nice shout out. All right, so I can't keep a deadpan face like James Lipton famously could, so I'm going to like be reacting here. But let's start with, so I'm going to try and sequence these 12 questions I thought of from like the lowest level, most physical and material aspects of Blueprint, working all the way up to psychological and like spiritual and philosophical. So I think what people most identify with these kinds of like ambitious health efforts is supplements. And your personal Blueprint protocol involves like a huge number of supplements, and they've kind of become huge in the last decade. There used to be a crazy outlier thing 10 years ago. I remember Ray Kurzweil used to take 150 supplements, and it seemed crazy then. But now you've got entire subreddits of people sharing nootropic stacks, and I think you're at the forefront of that revolution. And I've myself gone from like no supplements to about half a dozen. So can you talk about a couple of the most interesting supplements you take and why they're interesting?
Yeah, maybe a few layers to build upon that. My experience has been in working with doctors and researchers is nobody agrees with anyone. You could give the same research papers to 5 anti-aging experts and get 5 different protocols. It's just the state of play with where it's at. Sometimes you find some crossover on some more basic things, but generally speaking, you don't get consensus. And so the first order of business with the team was to survey everything we could get our hands on for longevity, health span, and lifespan. And then based upon that, write up extensive protocols on what we think we should do and why. And then the philosophy became, if we were to try to inquire of the body exactly what it needs based upon the evidence we could find, what would the body ask for? And so a lot of people do a mind approach first, like what is popular, what do most people do, looking for social proof. We just simply said, if you try to look at these basic levels of measurement, which you can tie with high degree of confidence to all-cause mortality, what would the body ask for? And so we use that frame and trying to channel something like, what would an Ernest Shackleton, or what would a Lewis and Clark, or what would a modern day explorer do if they were trying to be at the absolute frontier of anti-aging? What would the test case be? And so what we've tried to do is, over the course of Blueprint, I think that I've become the most measured person in history. And we've used that data to look at the scientific evidence and just say, what can we look at to try, what endpoints can we try to achieve? And so that's what we've gone after. And so there's not been any constraint on supplement number. We haven't said, 100 is impractical. We've just said, we're trying to achieve, quote unquote, perfect biomarkers according to the scientific literature we can get our hands on. And that's what the result has been. And so it's really an experiment on can the body ask, and can we give the body, and can we measure that closed loop process?
So do you have like a couple of supplements that you want to call out as like had interesting experimental results? Yeah.
I mean, we sometimes get really specific results in, like, for example, for my liver markers, for my ALT, AST, and GGT, they're cumulatively 49. I recently shared that publicly and said, hey, these, as far as I know, are better than anyone I know. If you have better ones, let me know. I haven't heard from anybody yet. So I'm trying to get, for example, the liver in terms of blood. The supplement protocol we have is on point. Now, I'm not answering your question specifically, Venkat, because I'm talking about systems. I will get to it in a minute. Or if you look at something like, I just had a DEXA scan done, and my bone mineral density is in the 99 point something percentile of 30-year-olds, which is the age min for the test. So those are more like system markers of how well you're doing. You could trace back the bone mineral density to something like CA-AKG, calcium alpha ketoglutarate, or genistein and vitamin D, and my exercise protocol. But I guess maybe to answer your question in the easiest way of like, just tell me what to do, which is like the most common question we get is, it's a really hard question to answer, because I guess it really depends on what you're trying to optimize for. We're trying to do whole body wellness. And so it depends if you're trying to work on bone mineral density, or liver, or I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's skip that one then. Maybe you can speak a little bit to kind of like how you decide whether or not things are working for you. So your trial and error protocol, like when we first scheduled this talk, you were getting like a bad allergic reaction to something. That's why you had to reschedule. So that's an obvious case of need to do something different. But is there a more subtle thing you do with trial and error? Like,
yeah, the rescheduling was, so I've been on a 2,000 calorie caloric restriction diet for the past 2 years. And part of a negative side effect was I lost a lot of volume in my face. And so we've been trying to revolumize that fat. And what a lot of people do as they age is when they use volume, they typically just use fillers. We didn't want to do that because it's not true rejuvenation. And so we've been trying to do these autologous fat transfers. And I would use my own fat, but I don't have enough fat on my body to do that. So I've used a donor. And so whenever I use this donor fat in my body, I blow up. Like I become an indistinguishable person. And our discussion was the day after. And so I thought it might be scary for people, but it was just an expected reaction. But yet we typically, with everything we do, we try to have an endpoint. So we identify a supplement or a therapy or an exercise, and we try to do full cycle measurement. And so the measurement protocol is biofluids, devices, imaging, and fitness tests, among other things. And so everything has a purpose. Just like the diet, every calorie has to fight for its existence. Every supplement has to fight for its existence. There's no carryover. There's no inclusion because it's cool. There's no inclusion because there's social proof. It has to be measured. And if it can't hit its endpoint, it's out. And so we try to keep that kind of tight, closed loop precision where nothing is carried over unless it can prove its worth.
So that's kind of like an extreme survival of the fittest supplement regimen situation. All right, switching tacks a little bit. You once described yourself to me, I don't know if you've said this publicly, but to me, I think you mentioned you think of yourself as a professional sleeper, and you've kind of like optimized sleep to the most extreme degree of anyone I know. So can you describe your sleep protocol and what difference it has made to go from like ordinary unmanaged sleep to being a sleep athlete?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first I would say that, when I was immersed in the culture of not really paying attention to how much sleep I got, and in that case, you lose your bearings on what it feels like to be truly rested because you're always in a state of suboptimal clarity. You just forget. So you're basically inebriated in life and you don't know it. And you're also stunted emotionally, where you're typically a bit more snippy and you get mad quicker. And so there's nothing in my existence that changes my conscious experience more than sleep. And to me, after having done this, I'm coming up on 6 months of a 100% sleep quality in Whoop streak. That also, I'm in the 99.6 percentile for recovery. So it's not just sleep 100% each night, but also my recovery. And since having experienced what it feels like to be truly rejuvenated in sleep, I build my life around it. And so there's a few things I do which are practical. One is I try to control my sleep environment circumstances as much as I can. So I have a room, I sleep alone. I have the luxury of being able to do that. It's blacked out. It's a temperature controlled mattress. And I try to control for sound, things like that. So I try not to avoid anything that could disturb me. That could be like a waking partner or sounds. I eat my last meal of the day at 11 a.m. So giving myself about 10 hours of digestion. That means right before I go to bed, my resting heart rate's around 45 to 49. And if that's the case, I typically am guaranteed a perfect night's sleep. If I've eaten later in the day, or if I've eaten the wrong foods, like even if I eat like if I just play around with somebody and eat like just a small something, my heart rate will go up to like 56, 57. And I know my sleep will be compromised. Sometimes my deep sleep up to like 40% with these small deviations. And so it's so tuned. I know these inputs. Now, some people feel a lot better when they eat two or 3 hours before bed. They don't like going to bed hungry, and that's fine. They can also achieve optimal health. So what I do is not necessarily the case for everybody, but what I have designed, I currently don't know anyone in the world who has higher quality sleep than me as measured with data. Now, I'm sure there's people out there who just haven't spoken up, but I would not have believed myself if I could have gone back and visited myself in the days of babies and working all night on startup stuff, that you could achieve this kind of sleep quality reliably. Because sleep is just it feels like it's almost out of our control. Every night we lay our pillow down, like we don't know what's going to happen.
That's a good way of putting it. It really is like spinning the wheel each time. We could spend a whole hour just talking about your diet and exercise, but let's touch on just one big point. So you got to where you did with the same kind of trial and error you do with supplements and stuff. But I remember at one point you were only eating during an extremely short morning window, but later you softened it a bit so you could eat dinner with your family. And you also often post pictures working out with your sons and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how you've managed the trade-off between optimizing your personal health and life radically versus being sort of in harmony with your family and friends and their individual lifestyles?
I have softened a lot from the earlier days. And so when I know that I'll go out to dinner with friends, I'll save up 500 calories and I'll get some steamed vegetables at the restaurant. And before, when I would go out with friends, I would try to be part of the group and my plate would be empty. And then it just was a showstopper for the entire social group. It was like, Bryan, why are you not eating? And it would, the entire conversation would be focused on me, which was not the objective of the social group. It was like get together so everybody can share their life experiences and talk about the things they want to talk about. And so I tried to just try to fold into the group and not call any attention to myself. And so I put something on my plate, put the fork to mouth, and people felt soothed. But it's like it really disrupts social dynamics when a person is meaningfully different than cultural norms, and people just can't enjoy themselves with the group. And so I've really tried to relax that so that my family experiences it, my friends experience it, so that my particular choices don't disturb the things they want to achieve in social groups.
So extensive testing is one of the big features of your protocol, and you've got a whole team of professionals, and you've got like hundreds of supplements you're like evaluating and testing at any given time, plus all these sleep and diet things going on. You've got like dozens of biochemical markers, and use a lot of both routine and exotic tests. So this is like extremely, extremely complex, thousands of variables. And like you said, you're trying to perfect a complex system with like lots and lots of complex dynamics. So at a larger, big picture level, how do you strategize around all this complex knowledge and uncertainty? The fact that some of it is like new and untested, and some of it has been known to work for 100 years. So how do you do the big picture strategy here?
Yeah, I mean, even some of the results we have this month are interesting, where I've been on this 2,000 calorie diet for 2 years. I'm vegan. I exercise for an hour a day. I do so 7 days a week. And so even when you take those, it quickly steps into territory where people say that's not possible. For example, like it's not possible to not lose bone mineral density on caloric restriction, or it's not possible to remain on a caloric restriction diet for a long period of time and exercise, or it's not possible to exercise 7 days a week, 1 hour a day. You need rest days. And so a lot of these things, if you combine those 4 things, caloric restriction, vegan, 7 days of exercise, no rest days, and then you look at my markers, it's actually okay. We're looking at it from tendon and ligament strength with ultrasound to speed of aging to, everything. And so from a system perspective, can somebody do this and can it be sustainable? It's like an interesting data point. Maybe, for me it is. Now, that's not to say it solves all things. Like we're still trying to solve loss of facial fat, in my face. And so like we're trying to solve for hundreds of things at the same time. Now, caloric restriction is really beneficial for slowing the speed of aging and other benefits, but it has this cost of slimming of the face. And so we're really trying to titrate all the trade-offs of slowing speed of aging and rejuvenation and athletic ability and VO2 max, your body's ability to utilize oxygen. So it's almost like, the game where you're trying to hit that thing where it pops up. I forget the name of it all the time, but it really is a dynamic problem. It's very complicated. We're getting a lot better at it than we ever have been. But some of the most recent results, like for example, like the VO2 max, you put the mask on your face and you run on a treadmill. My result was 58.7. So that's in the top 1.5% of 18-year-olds. And that just declines in a linear fashion with age. So some of these results are truly impressive. They're better than I ever achieved in my entire life.
On the more high-tech side of all this testing, like I've done the VO2 max mask thing, and I think like maybe a lot of people have. But yeah, your Blueprint project intersects with the Kernel in a significant way, and that's like really leading edge technology that's barely in the market yet. So can you talk about the intersection of Kernel Tech and your personal Blueprint project, and something interesting that's happening there, being a guinea pig?
Yeah, so 7 years ago, like Venkat mentioned, I just started building Kernel, and the idea was trying to make the mind an engineering discipline. So in the same way we do basic things like we purchase a washer and dryer, we don't think whether it's going to fit through our front door. We just know it's going to, because society has built these standards of measurement based upon things we know. We buy a car, we don't wonder whether it's going to fit in the lanes on the road. We just know it will. And so the idea was, if we could create baseline measurements for the mind that would feed back into everything we design in society, from all of our technology to our social norms to everything else, that might be interesting for our overall wellness. And so we surveyed every technology in existence, looking at the edge of physics. How could we possibly get at the brain in a low-cost, high-quality fashion? And we came up with this technology using spectroscopy. And so we use light. We shine light on the head. You just put this helmet on. It's the size of a bike helmet. And we use 2 wavelengths, and we can read out patterns in the brain. And so most people in the field thought this was impossible, which I think was probably true. But we went ahead and we built a custom chip. It took us 3 years to build that. And then all the electronics. We built the entire stack of that technology. It works. So we now have several publications on the technology. And just this past week, one of our algorithms is succeeding. We just surpassed fMRI in its ability to determine brain age. So you just put the helmet on, and in 7 minutes, by watching a video, you get a brain age score based upon your functional patterns. So it's a new algorithm. We still have a lot of work to do, but the early data is really compelling. And that's what we wanted to do, is the most basic marker. So you can draw your blood and say, what's my cholesterol? That's something we understand. You can do things to act on cholesterol. When you measure your brain, if you're not doing it for a tumor or for cancer, what are you doing? And so we thought that a single marker like age would be this actionable, understandable thing. It also feeds really well into cognitive impairment. And so currently Kernel is in the clinic looking at mild cognitive impairment and also depression. We're trying to get biomarkers for scaling of brain scanning. So after 7 years of pursuing this, we're finally at the start line of this technology working in the clinic.
I am almost afraid to put on that helmet and figure out my brain age. I'm assuming I'll find out I'm 300 years old. But okay, so one of the most fascinating things about your protocol is that you've gradually surrendered more and more control over your life to sort of data measurement feedback loops, and also almost unbundling yourself into a set of personas. You've written this interesting essay about never letting evening Bryan make food decisions because he always wants to eat a cookie, and therefore morning Bryan gets to decide what to do. So how did you land on the scheme of using a multiple personality approach to, surrendering control to the wisest version of yourself plus scientific processes?
Is really out of desperation. Every night at 7 p.m., I would overeat, and I would do so to try to soothe the challenges of my life. I was chronically depressed in a challenging relationship, building a startup. I had 3 little babies, just, all the stuff we're accustomed to in life. And the only source of soothing I could achieve was to eat these foods. And it was always bad foods, processed foods. It was bad for me. And I gained 50 pounds. And I tried to stop this behavior, and I was helpless to do so. And so one night, out of jest, almost out of giving up, I just said, evening Bryan, you're fired. You no longer can run me from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. You're an absolute nemesis. You make my life miserable. And it was the levity of the situation that allowed me to break myself into multiple pieces. And then I just started playing on that. And it gave me this power I didn't have before. And so then I started having this internal dialogue of morning Bryan and afternoon Bryan and aspiration Bryan, the different versions of me with different biochemical states. And it was the breakthrough for me that allowed me to get out of my predicament of being helpless. And I still can carry on today in the same inner dialogue with myself through the various parts of the day, because I know I literally am different people in different biochemical states with different proclivities and behaviors. So to me, that's been useful. For others, I think it resonates because most people identify with versions of themselves that they aren't happy with.
You once wrote a post or a Twitter thread, I'm not sure, in the voice of evening Bryan, protesting the control of morning Bryan. So is that a real ongoing tension? Does evening Bryan ever hijack control and eat a cookie, or is he mostly defeated now? Do you ever have doubts about whether maybe evening Bryan is the wiser one and should be in charge because he's more spontaneous and improvises?
Yeah, I just finished up Zero Logs, which is basically it's a 300-page book that breaks me out into 10 different characters. And these characters have a debate amongst themselves about the future of humanity. And I tried to give each character airtime for them to express their viewpoints. And I try to make it clear that each person in their context is justified in their worldview, and that this tension is understandable and it's expected. But ultimately, there needs to be some goal alignment among the characters. Otherwise, you've got you become paralyzed. And so I do think that even Bryan's perspectives are valid. I mean, he has an unfair task where at 7 o'clock, when he resumes the control of my conscious state, he's saddled with all of my life's problems. He just gets dumped on. And he's in a bad spot. And I understand. He's kind of like, why are you doing this to me? I just want relief. I didn't sign up for this thing. And so, yes, I do understand where he's coming from. And he has good perspectives.
One of the hardest parts of doing what you do is all the visible transformations you've gone through very publicly. And people have compared you to an alien or a vampire. You get tons of mean comments on Twitter, and you get sort of extremes of both admiration and hatred. And sometimes it seems like you almost deliberately play to this narrative with the provocative photos you share and sort of like the trolling comments you did. And we've talked about a little bit of this in the background about how your relationship with the public has evolved. And last time I think we talked one-on-one, you came up with the idea of like it would be fun to play the villain or the devil, and I followed up on that and pissed off a bunch of religious people. So how has your relationship with the public evolved since you were just another successful entrepreneur among many, and now you have this kind of unique persona out there?
I mean, first, I've never had more fun in my entire life. I've never been happier. I've never felt more fulfilled. I've never felt more free. I'm having the time of my life. I think that at first when I did Blueprint for 2 years and no one cared. And then Bloomberg, the article came out earlier this year and it just blew up. And I did not anticipate it had that amount of dry powder underneath it. And it just exploded in every direction. And in examining like, what was the source of the energy? And I hadn't put my finger on that, but it's so much more that the hate is really camouflaging many of the true things happening behind it. And so now what I do systematically is I really am trying to find mountains of energy. Where are the hidden sources of power in society that want to come up for surface for air and to cycle through themselves? And so in many ways, I'm on a fishing expedition, and each one provokes an interesting dynamic within the public. And so to me, it's been really helpful. The responses, I've never received my engagement with people around me in my community, friends, family, and even extension, has never been more deep or meaningful than now, where people will bring really serious things to me that they never would have before because these topics just couldn't be broached. And so I think for me, it's the ability to put the finger on the right thing, and it then unleashes itself in ways you can't expect. But really, I like the strategy of, in order to get the right answer, you have to pose the wrong question.
I think it's worked really well. And I think the phrase mountains of energy is going to stick with me for a while. That's an interesting one. And yeah, I didn't think about this before, but you doing these sort of like seemingly transgressive things in public has a permissioning effect where people feel okay talking about stuff they weren't okay before. So switching gears a little bit from there, I think it's a related thing, but aesthetics has clearly been a big part of your journey, and you've experimented with dance, music, clothing, and other kinds of expression. You've also written a children's book. So what role does aesthetics play in pulling all this together holistically?
My entire life growing up was everything that I could not do. It was a rule book of, here are the things you can, like stay within these boundaries, but basically it's a life of do not do. And since then, my life has become entirely about exploring what I can do. And it's continually trying to push the boundaries of every possible sphere. And so right now, the primary thing I'm working on is we're announcing there's a female that's completed the first 30 days of Blueprint. Females, that's been the number one question about Blueprint is, okay, great, we see this on a male's body. Can we please see it on a female? And so she's been selected. She got through her first 30 days. And to announce this, we're doing a photo shoot. And I'm going to retell the origin story of humanity. So if we say Adam and Eve, that was like the first story we told about our origin. If we were to retell the origin story of humanity today, what would it be? And so the image I have in my mind that I'm playing with is something like we rename Adam and Eve to 0 and infinity. And the image is split in half. On the right side, you've got 0 and infinity frolicking in some kind of utopia that's basically without pollution, without conflict, without seemingly destructive things. And then the image is split. On the left side, you see gears and the mechanical elements of our world. And what it's meant to raise is this question one, which to me is the central question of our time, is we humans have been the dominant source of intelligence on this earth for quite some time. Computational intelligence just exceeded us in its ability to do things in these very narrow ways, and we can likely expect it will continue to do so. Do we think humans are going to be able to solve the existential problems we face, or do we need to have some kind of shared control of these systems, or give ourselves to the control entirely? And if we do give these computational systems control because they're just better at managing the complexity of reality than we can, that we've hit our ceiling, then do we have free will? And if we don't, do we even know it, or do we realize it? And so this image of this origin story is basically to provoke this conversation in this moment of existential risk as a species. Do we really think we can solve the problems in front of us, or are we better off giving the reins of control to these computational systems? And do we really even care about free will anyways? Will we even notice that anything changed? So it's trying to provoke what I think is like a potentially interesting conversation of this moment.
I think the zero infinity Adam and Eve Garden of Eden story is going to like provoke even more controversy than anything you've done so far. It's going to be really fun to watch. So to anyone who's followed your journey, it's clear that you're something like an explorer or astronaut at the edge of, inner space or transhuman biological space. And even if money weren't a factor, almost nobody could pull off what you do. And I know you've talked a lot about being inspired by Shackleton's polar expedition, and you and I have spent a lot of time talking about what's the most ambitious mission for your life ever and so forth. And I saw how much soul searching and world searching it took for you to land on this Kernel Brain Tech and Blueprint projects. Like people see the current version of you playing out this character on social media, but I've seen what effort you put into it for 10 years. It is like Shackleton level polar expedition. So what's your current inner narrative? Is Shackleton still your role model and idol?
I've been thinking a lot about this question, and in each era, there's an archetype that emerges that is suitable for the time. And so if you look at the Renaissance or the founding of America, the founding fathers or explorers or whatever, there's a group of people that typically emerge as the archetype, and they have certain kinds of abilities and education that allow them to do the objective. And the question I really have been asking lately is, the only game right now that's being played on planet Earth is the future of intelligent existence. Everything else is just noise. I mean, this is an absolute singular journey into the future of intelligent existence. And so the question is, from the human side, what is the archetype that can contribute meaningfully in this moment? And that's what I've been trying to formulate in myself, is if I'm trying to be of use to society in some positive way. And so I think Shackleton is a data point. I think that all the biographies I've read, they're all data points as well. This time is unique. And that's why I've been trying to fuse technology and science and social media and religion and absurdity. And I've been trying to fuse all these different silos into a cohesive archetype that I can play with to say, like, is this potentially right for this moment? Or if not, how do I adjust?
And I think that's a good segue into my last question, after which we'll open it up. So religion has clearly played a huge part in your life. Your journey started in some ways when you left Mormonism. And in many ways, your journey over the last decade has been about constructing a new personal religion for yourself out of science and technology. So how would you describe your religion today? What are its beliefs and tenets?
It really is two words: don't die. I mean, this is the most interesting thing I think happening right now. Is there's never been a point in history where death was maybe. It's always been inevitable. And then we've come up with stories to justify what we do given that. And we come up with stories about the afterlife we get if we follow these certain rules. But never have we been able to contend that death may not be inevitable. If that's the case, what is the philosophical scaffolding you build around that? And right now, I just don't know of any other game I want to play other than don't die. And it's not just don't die, it's don't die personally, don't kill each other, don't kill the planet, or don't make it unstable, and don't underestimate the importance of aligning ourselves with AI. But that's really it. That's all we have to do. That's the only to-do list that's the only thing we have on our to-do list as a species.
Don't die. So that's like the shortest description of a religion I've ever heard, I think. So with that, let's switch over to Q&A, and please raise your hand with the emoji reaction thing, and Josh will direct questions.
We've got a few questions that have popped up in the Discord, so we'll just go through those as we're waiting for other hands to raise. Kia's got a interesting question here. Kia, if you'd like to speak that to the group.
Sure, thank you. And thanks so much for the interesting conversation. So my question is basically, within Blueprint Protocol, what is your insurance policy against the black swans of the unconscious? Because often, like when the mind, or in this case, for example, the mind being aware of biomarkers and acting on them, exercises significant control over the body, something else within you responds in rebellion.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess the way what I heard you say is, it's almost like the data we can capture from our five senses as humans is a fraction of reality. And we need instruments to capture the invisible parts of reality. So what invisible parts of this system are we not capturing? Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Yeah. I suspect then the appropriate answer would be, we are probably incredibly primitive right now with our measurement protocol, and that in some duration of time, we would look back and say, oh my goodness, we can't believe we were making decisions on that limited amount of insight. So I have to assume that we're going to follow any trajectory of discovery that we just don't know as much as we think we do. And we're going to be surprised when we get deeper into our understanding, would be my guess.
Great. Rafa's got a question.
Hi, Bryan. It's really fascinating to hear everything that you're kind of doing and optimizing. I'm curious. So you've spoken a lot about health metrics, physical body and mental health and such. And I'm curious if there are metrics that are associated with social well-being that you track and manage, and what type of social activities, if any, are correlated with your well-being and your objectives of not dying.
We have been, that's on our list of basically, we've put that onto a second tier of measurement. Those things, of course, are harder to measure. Sometimes they're done through surveys or other ways. We've tried to stay pretty narrowly focused on the things we can speak to with data and that have some sort of scientific reference, because the primary problem we're trying to solve is health and wellness resembles the structure of religion, where typically it's a charismatic founder who comes up with their thing, and then people follow that thing, not with evidence, but based upon story. And we've tried to say, hey, in a world that's dominated by a religious-like narrative for health and wellness, we want to punch through and speak with data only. And if we step into areas where we can't do so with as much confidence, our fear has been that we will lose credibility by playing a specific game that can be spoken about with a shared language. And if I step into anything that is my opinion or my subjective experience, then we will be on equal authoritative positions as everyone else in the market. And so I agree with you, incredibly relevant, and even more so potentially. And sometimes we just lack the tools to measure these things, which we'd like. but I think about this from my mom. Like, you know, my mom, of course, like she's not, you know, eye deep in the world of health and wellness. She just wants to know what to do and who to trust. And she's so confused. Like, first I hear eggs are good for me, then I hear eggs are bad for me. What do I do? So we've really been trying to solve for the most basic thing of like, is there something that can be done that we kind of trust?
Great, thank you. Toby, you have a question in Discord if you'd like to go ahead and voice that question.
Sure. Thank you. This has been very interesting. A lot of the discussion and even a couple of the questions that were just asked kind of touched on mental health. And I wanted to ask you like about your more holistic understanding of it. You've kind of focused on diet and body health to manage your mental experience. And you've talked a lot about your mental experience being, you know, driven by stuff like sleep health, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm curious if you subscribe to like a totally physicalist biochemical account of mental health, or you have other ideas. You know, you're also talking in like internal family systems terms when you talk
Mm-hmm.
about your zero book. Like where are you at with that whole realm?
Yeah. A little similar to, I think it was Toby who answered.
That's me.
No, not Toby. Sorry.
Yeah. Rafa was the previous question.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
And Kia was, yeah.
Yeah. In a similar vein where Kernel is the objective in trying to solve a biomarkers for mental health so that we can quantitatively make an assessment of that. Right now, we can do questionnaires around that and report out. Maybe they're helpful, maybe they're not, but we've just simply steered away from that as once we step in there, we enter into so much controversy and we have very little basis to add value because the field is pretty well established. People's opinions are pretty strong. And so we've tried to just get the smallest of a wedge in this game to say we can speak authoritatively on one narrow band of topics. And that is like you've looking at these biometrics, you know, and that's the only thing we're good at, to simply say there is a way to figure out an answer that may be better than others where everyone else is just fighting. And so I think what you're saying, I agree, it's much more advanced than what we're doing now. We're trying to do the baby step of, like, can you establish an answer that is better than others? And so Toby, I don't think I answered your question in a robust way, other than to say like we're pretty narrow on our objectives right now.
Yeah, no, cool. That makes sense. Thanks, sir. I appreciate the answer. And I agree that it's a very well-defined realm, but I also feel that there's a lot of opportunity in applying a kind of similar approach. And you know, psychology in general does, you know, operate in a kind of religion-like way. I think that's what makes it interesting to try to evaluate on these terms.
Yeah. You know, like, I think it's like, I love your question. I love all these questions. Again, I knew this, like anyone who Venkat associate with is just, I love how you guys think. It's amazing. You immediately take this and you scaffold very quickly. What I've discovered in doing this is the moment I talk about something publicly, there are dozens of people that know something, they know more about the topic than I do. And so it's such a tricky dance because a know-it-all strategy is going to be terribly wrong, and it's not correct anyways. But trying to get enough credibility to say we're a player in this thing and we're contributing is hard. And so we've just tried to be just ever so delicate to say like, hey, we totally get that. Well, like we probably know less than you and we're less sophisticated with you on this given thing. This baby step, we're trying to make a positive contribution. And so, you know, I don't know if we found the right approach on that. I think a lot of people feel frustrated because we either don't go too far or in their opinion, we've gone too far. So maybe we're just fine tuning on how to step into this game and acknowledge everyone else's expertise and also try to get directionally, like someone feels safe, they can do this thing and like they're in good hands.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Dorian's up next.
Hi there. Thanks for that. I guess what I'm sort of imagining is that since you're piloting this protocol on yourself, and you've got now a female confederate, and you've got all of this bespoke infrastructure, you're inventing tests, you're inventing, discovering markers and so on. And I'm assuming you're going to be, productizing slices of this because it's extraordinarily expensive for any other person to participate. But I'm curious, it's like, what is your posture of your organization? I mean, given that if what you're sort of trying to assert is that like these are the objective criteria that are like effectively universal for everybody, so presumably like competitors would also be able to like show up and be like, yeah, well, if this is objectively true for others, and we can do this a similar thing. And I mean, I guess what I'm sort of curious about, like in contrast to various other wellness products and services, which again are like pure phlogiston, like luminiferous ether level, and you're kind of sounds like you're trying to inject some rigor into it. Like, I guess, like, are you okay with that competitive landscape, sort of burgeoning up around your, trying to get past the sort of the phlogiston and get into some rigor?
Yeah, the objective of Blueprint was never to start a business. It's always been about the future of intelligent existence.
Okay.
And it's really, this is not about diet and wellness. This is about computational systems of intelligence that are superior to our native abilities in managing our best long-term interests. And so so if others do this, excellent. That's the objective. And so when I'm working with several people right now, like for example, I'm number one on the leaderboard right now for reduction of my speed of aging using this DNA methylation test. I'm working with several people to help them beat me. Like, I want others to knock me off the leaderboard. I want others to do these things. So really the objective is this larger game we're playing as a species. And I view it as favorable and positive.
I'm really I'm excited to hear more people take this position, considering the sort of incumbents are always like, we want to, maximize, short-term gains and but at the same time have the sort of business continuity, create the moat, et cetera, et cetera. So I find this attitude very interesting.
Yeah, we have a few products we're creating, but I almost did. Okay, I did it begrudgingly. I don't want to build a food business. Like, that was never part of my thing. I'd rather build deep tech on a kernel scale. But people genuinely were like, look, I want to do it. I think this is the right thing for me to do, but it's just way too hard. Can you make it easy? And so we have for the past 6 months put that together. I hope it helps people. It really is not my primary interest in life. And I don't love spending my time on doing it. Other things I could be doing, but yeah.
It's fan service.
Awesome. Timber, you're up next.
Hey, Bryan. I'm wondering, with all the health optimization that's going on with Blueprint, how much of a bottleneck, if at all, is safety? So at risk of being injured through a car crash or a flight. And how do you go about managing that, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the almost certain way I'm going to die is by getting hit by a bus. I mean, nothing would please the internet more. Like, can you imagine the beautiful irony that would occur if that were to happen? And so I mean, I'm in all seriousness, I fully expect myself to die in some ridiculous fashion. I just don't know if the universe can be true if irony is not the ultimate answer in the equation. Now, having said that, I try to be as mindful as I can. So for example, every time I get into my car, anytime my children get into their cars, we have a rule. You must repeat out loud, driving is the most dangerous thing I do. And then you can leave. But until you say that out loud, you cannot drive. And so we try to have these practices where we just say, looking at the data, what are the most probable ways we're going to die? And so I try to be mindful. Now, having said that, My son and I recently did a 3-day trip in Baja, Mexico. We rode motorcycles 500 miles in 3 days, and we loved it. It was such a great experience. And many people criticize me saying, I don't know how you can justify this kind of behavior when you spend the majority of your life trying to extend your life, then you do this high risk behavior on motorcycles. So I mean, I'm not going to try to justify the behavior. Like, I guess it just is what it is, but I try to be mindful about it. I like the idea of micromorts, of like looking at that as a concept. If you haven't looked at that, it's a good write-up on Wikipedia. But I guess in terms of like one more broad thing on safety and efficacy, we've spent the first 2.5 years largely trying to master the basics of diet and sleep and exercise. And now we're moving on to more advanced therapies. So we've been looking into gene therapy extensively for the past 1.5 years. We haven't found one that meets the criteria. We just did, and we're probably going to do it next month. And so we're now walking into these more competent, more capable therapies, which have kind of a different safety profile, not risk, but like just different. But we're starting to take more calculated risks with these things, because if we really want to show this endeavor is more than living 10 or 20 years longer and feeling well, it's like really trying to punch through that ceiling, then we need to take the next step. And that's where we're at now.
To live is to risk it all, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. Chanel, you're up next.
I'm curious if you have thoughts to share about how your process of working on anti-aging experimentation in public creates sort of any potential conflicts of interest with the actual science involved, or where the science could lead in terms of, I guess, commonly with a lot of online creators, incentives of creating to produce content versus sort of the experiment itself.
You're saying the perceptions that people have of anti-aging?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm saying, like, I wonder, like, do you ever feel pressure to sort of direct your experiments in a way that would create like different kinds of content or versus sort of the needs of the experiment itself?
Yeah. Blueprint is definitely a careful balance of performance art and science, unquestionably. And I occasionally get hand smacked for moving one direction or the other. And sometimes on the performance art side, people are appreciative because it makes sense to them, whereas science didn't translate. And then the scientists are like, look, you're discrediting our field, stop it. And I listen to try to tune myself, not trying to be too influenced by either side. I mean, I guess like, I don't know. I'm trying. I have no idea how well I'm doing.
Thank you.
Great. Do we have any final questions for Bryan? We are running up against our time today. So if there are no other questions, I just want to say thanks a lot to Bryan for taking some time out of his day to chat with us. And thanks to Venkat for facilitating this conversation. Our next guest talk will be next Wednesday on August the 9th. And yeah, we'll see you all there. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure to meet you guys.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks, Bryan.